So, thank you everyone for showing up for ICMI 2021. We have Alan Miller's live Q&A after the wonderful presentation that he did. How are you doing today, Alan?
Good, thanks, Chris. Appreciate being here.
Awesome deal. So, this is like before. Go ahead and post questions. We're going to look at some of the questions on Whova, but the best way to get your questions answered is to post them in the Zoom window. If you're looking at the Whova interface with Zoom, on the bottom of the little black screen there, there's going to be a Q&A button. Press that and ask your questions. Once again, we want to remind people that please post questions in the questions and answers section. If you post comments, they will not be seen by the panelists, and we will delete them. And also don't post links either in the Q&A because we're not going to click on them. Where you just want questions in there to make sure that we're asking Mr. Millard here the questions that all of you really want to ask him. So do you want to start us off there, Vernon?
Yeah, sure. So Sean G has a question. You mentioned someone called Frederick Hayward or similar. Could you tell us more about him?
Frederick Hayward was the person who was ahead of men's rights in California. He was based out of Sacramento, and actually he's still around. He's actually in my group, Men's Equality. But he's kind of bowed out. Probably it's been 4 decades, so he's still in the loop, but he's kind of bowed out of anything major. But he is one of the main people involved. In fact, he goes back to some of these people, like I don't know if this individual has heard of Frank Bertels, and also this is part of my library, the Richard Doyle, but Frederick Hayward was a part of the cause back then, and like I said, he's pretty much one of the authorities in men's rights, men's equality advocacy.
Okay. Next question we have is from Dean Hedges, a speaker here this year. Do you think that the men's rights movement is something more than a movement? Are we actually seeing an evolution?
I know, Dean. Hello, Dean. I think that if we're lucky, it will be that. And if we can create enough awareness, and part of that awareness is knowledge, where we can really get through to people, then that will create a lot of the resistance and the understanding we need amongst the populace to succeed.
Douglas Wallace asks, why do you think equality between the sexes is what is needed? Should we not recognize the differences between the sexes and therefore treat them differently?
No, we need equality in status and value. And part of the equality is recognizing our differences and coming to a compromise with those differences. And that's also why I call my efforts, although they are men's rights, men's equality, because that includes everything, not just men's rights, but their value, their existence as human beings. And that is a very important consideration that we must keep in mind, because without value, you can lose your rights.
I wish they put the mute button on the other side of the screen so it'd be easier. Okay, our next question comes from Carl Palmer. Thanks for your presentation, Alan. You mentioned men need to be educated and your books. Is there a particular order they should be read?
Well, I believe that Equality and Man's Claim should come first. And that explains the basic premise. And I began writing that prior to feminism's influence on society. And that basically sets the foundation in understanding, because it addresses chivalry in practice amongst men and women, the dating process and the court process and child custody, family court. It's still based on that now, but chivalry is the basic premise upon which feminists have founded their cause. And we need to get rid of that. Like, that's the underlying tumor that needs to be extracted, is chivalry and placing women on a pedestal above men. Women first, ladies first, women's prerogative. That's all based on a traditional cultural effect in our society that sets the very foundation of what we're fighting against.
Sorry.
Okay. I'm sorry. I should say that's the first book they should read. And then Land, People, Politics, and Ignorance is part of that. But I just got a notice here that my space is stopped recording. But we need to then, as far as reading my books, definitely read A Flaw from Within, because it's based upon this, but more advanced, and it includes modern day feminists and modern day misandry, whereas I refer to traditional misandry as chivalry.
Philip Tanzer asks, question regarding male disposability. I actually like the willingness of men to sacrifice their energy and even their life for what they deem worth defending. Of course, I oppose this tendency being taken advantage of, but I think it is an overall positive instinct. I think this instinct should be encouraged in women again, especially in regards to their children, family, and husbands. What are your thoughts?
I believe that basic standard should not just apply to men, but to women. If a man's in trouble and he needs help, why can't a woman come to his rescue, help him? Like lifeguards, women lifeguards. There was an incident that happened about 2 years ago down in Florida, where this female lifeguard, she was off duty, but she was up in the restaurant bar area overlooking the beach. And she seen this man in trouble. And she burst out of there onto the beach, recognizing that he needed trouble, and she rescued him. And why not? Why shouldn't we have that? That's equal consideration, equal justice, equal empathy and compassion. So I disagree, other than saying it should apply equally to men and women. And that's part of the equality concept.
Okay, so we kind of have a lull of questions right now, so I'm going to pull one that I want to ask Alan, but definitely start piling in the questions, because let me tell you, Alan is a wealth of information. And it's like I said in the last video, he's been in this a long time and he has seen a lot. So anything you want to know, just feel free to ask. But I'm going to ask you this. How do you feel that women are able to use pregnancy as a way to leave the military, a privilege men don't have?
Well, that happens, as I understand, before they're going to possibly deployed into dangerous areas. And that option should not be available to them. But that's definitely a female privilege. And I think there should be stricter military standards that require consequences for those actions, for them doing that. And it's not right, but they're catered to. And we need to punish those women if we can show it's a deliberate or a lack of birth control use. Then yeah, they need to be held accountable for their choices.
So I have one of my own questions as well. How do we incentivize fellow anti-feminists to also fight what you call traditional misandry if they aren't already?
We need to emphasize how feminism is built upon traditional misandry, and that it's only chivalry on steroids, as far as I've referenced. Because if it wasn't for chivalry and traditional misandry, feminism would not have had a foothold. It wouldn't have had a premise upon which to build. And it's interesting now, too, in a negative way, how feminists and feminism and chivalry has come together to create a more advanced level of misandry, where they're they have the best of both worlds and then a combination of the two to produce a hybrid. And this, of course, is at men's expense, at society's expense. And we see all these things not only in the new laws that are made and using sexuality, the female sexuality, as a weapon, but we see it in like family court, in the dating process, and it's still there, but yet tweaked with feminism and even more injustice and advantages at men's expense. So we need to really emphasize the double standards and the hypocrisy that's all connected to that.
Okay, so as we mentioned in the previous interview, you used to be a professor at a traditional university, and you definitely saw like the rise of political correctness and the fall of that, and then of the new wave of feminism. So given how toxic higher education is currently, would you recommend men to go to college?
I would recommend men to go to college in certain schools. I would suggest they check out the schools. Some schools are a little bit more tolerant and understanding of men and their perspective, but I guess I'd have to say in general terms, I don't know, I can't say in general terms, but as far as avoiding, it depends on the subject. As far as avoiding certain classes and courses, yes. But the sad part is, like with myself, I had to deal with this myself. I had to choose certain schools. And in fact, one in my doctoral studies was against me. And I mean, that's a whole issue on its own, in its own right, but it was controlled by feminists and a feminist professor I had. And I had to go to another school to continue my doctoral studies. But I did this by targeting certain subjects and getting the information I wanted in supplemental form to my other education and experience that I've acquired on my own. But it's hell, it's horrible. You've got to tolerate a lot of bias and prejudice, a lot of misandry in the process. But that's something that I can't say, and I do not recommend men to do, is not get education, because it's so valuable. I worship education and knowledge because it's important, but not in the form it is now. We have to get feminism out of our educational system because it's like a it's like a cancer, a brain cancer of our country, because I consider our educational system that, our brain. And that's one of the worst travesties that I've seen happen. Select your education. Try to educate yourselves to even to the point of challenging coursework. I guess that's my best way to address that, because that is a legitimate consideration. And if you're going to acquire education and training just for a job, a career, then I would suggest no. Get your training in an objective way through, like if you want to be an electrician or plumber or carpenter, that's fine. Forget our educational institutions as far as like bachelor's, master's, doctorate degrees. But what this does is it takes away men's abilities to be in leadership positions, you might say, politically, and in professions in which we need men, like psychologists, counselors, for the men that have suffered from misandry. That's really needed. And there's many men who have gone through therapy and counselors and all, who are further damaged yet by these products of our educational system. And if we can find some way around this where they can get the education without this feminist influence and this misandry, well, then I'm all for that. And we've got to investigate that further.
Indeed. Sean G, thank you for your question, by the way, Sean. He asks, when we were kids, most families were a mom and a dad and kids. Today, that's very rare, and living alone is no longer the exception. How important do you feel the extra profits for corporations have been as covert drivers for social atomization? Multiple households need multiples of everything.
Now, if I understand the question, it's how big business and corporations have benefited at the expense of our society and extorted. Yes, I've in fact, my book, Land, People, Politics, and Ignorance, actually addresses some of that, and also Flaw from Within. Now I'm hoping I'm going in the right direction here, but a worthwhile consideration is that we've taken away those very core values that we need to perpetuate a good society, in that we've exploited people through the convenience of like fast food and McDonald's short attention spans. It all sort of fits in, where a quick fix in food, a quick fix in thought, where we don't have critical thinking, something that's also taken away from our educational system. And we don't allow ourselves to really think things through, and our whole lifestyle, including the food we eat, supports that whole narrative of a quick fix, something that we don't, that bores us, that we're lazy. That's like this attention span, like only what you can't keep somebody's attention for what, maybe a minute or two. That's why TikTok is so popular. I hate to say it, but it's important to be able to get into an advanced thought process and really think things out. And it's strange too how sometimes the food you eat will stimulate that process as well. So this is what's happening in our society, is that, oh, I'm bored. This makes too much sense. I don't want to listen to it. And it's hard. Thinking actually takes up more energy than physical exercise. It's kind of crazy. When I first learned, I thought, wow, that's amazing. But really thinking is beneficial to us in so many different ways. And that's why we're so subject and receptive to propaganda, is we get these quick fixes that stay in our minds and our psyche from feminists and the crap we see over TV, and we lose a complete thinking, living process that complements intellectualism.
Well, Sean G has posted that he's pleased with your answer, but I wanted to go back to what his question basically was about and give a little bit more clarification, because I think it's a very poignant one, that corporations are really taking advantage of the family situation right now. That a child could have two Thanksgiving, one with mom and one with dad. That means we got to buy two turkeys. Or Christmas. Now we have two Christmases. So now a child kind of gets twice as many gifts, so that corporations are taking advantage of this family situation of, well, now consumers have to buy twice as much instead of just one set of things in a complete family. So what are your thoughts on that? What is corporations doing this? And if so, what do we do about it?
Yeah. One thing that's important, and I've gone through this with my own child, my own daughter, and is cooperate. It starts actually in the courts and in the custody arrangement, where you've got to separate yourself and your differences. A man and a woman who once were together and formed a child. Even though they're separate, their child is and should be encouraged to be united with both parents. And the parents have to work as a team, as if they were still married when it comes to that child, instead of compete against each other. Well, I got these many presents. Well, I got these many presents. And the child is aware of this competition that takes away any personal attachment to each parent and instills instead a very financial type of attachment that should not exist. And they need to have that personal connection rather than a gift connection. And they need to say to each other, well, I got this for Timmy or Susie, whoever. And so if you got this, or if you wanted to get this, or I can get this, then we need to work together, is what I'm saying, as parents, and not cater to what's being forced upon us by corporations and this whole narrative of, I guess you'd say, endorsing this separation and hatred of one parent towards the other, and this monetary type of attachment by children to their parents. And we need to stand against that and not cater to purchasing products or patronizing these companies that do this. Now, is that, I think I answered the question.
Yeah, I think you answered it pretty well, but Sean says further, I've heard it said in all seriousness, sugar causes materialism. What do you think?
Yes, it can. If that's the coating we put on something. See, in the past, a lot of people made things for children, that had them attached to it. They were, it wasn't materialistic, but it was a gift that had their personal identity attached to that gift. Like grandma or Aunt Betsy, she'd crochet something or knit something, a sweater or something, and that would be a Christmas gift. And a lot of times there'd be like embroidered in there, Aunt Betsy or whatever, love you, and it would be right there, a connection. Fathers would build like a sled for their kid, and even put in like burn it in there from your dad or whatever. But this is something that we've gotten away from with materialistic values. One example is that computers, iPods and all, are something we can't make, and children value those things so much, and young adults, children. And we've got to somehow incorporate or move away from those values. What I mean by incorporate is maybe have something that will bring up pictures of the people involved. But we're so much in an electronic age now that we need to devise something that's going to connect children with their parents and loved ones, and impose, not force, but have it right there as far as children and other people and their parents that will be personal, something of personal value rather than materialistic value and appreciation. That's one thing that gets me too, is a lot of mothers will entertain their children by letting them have like games and stuff that are electronic games where there's no interaction with parents or their siblings other than some electronic screen. And in the past, I recall myself as having games where you interacted and with each other in not over virtual form, but in person. And you laughed and you shared expressions and all that. That's lacking. And that's very important that we bring that back.
Philosophical side of things, but I think Sean was being a little bit more scientific, as he says. It's to do with brain chemistry, that the digestion of sugar causes people to, I guess, want to buy materials. I want to bring Sean on so maybe he can better explain his point. I've sent him a message to come on.
Okay.
So Sean, if you'd like to come in and talk to Alan directly about this so we can better understand your point, the invitation's out there, but do you have any knowledge about chemicals in the brain that might, like, if we keep giving children just sweets, then all they want to do is consume?
Okay. Is he going to elaborate, or is this?
He wants to know how he's going to come on, so we're going to go ahead and promote him to panelist so he can come on. Oh, don't worry about it. So here is Sean G. So go ahead and there you go.
If you can bear it.
Hello, Sean.
Hello, man. I've been just loving hearing your voice. It takes me, honestly, your voice has just moved me. And it seemed to me that so much of what you were saying recalled very powerful images of my childhood, taking me back to where I grew up. Now, I grew up in England, in northern England, which wasn't exactly the trendiest place in the world, but I was very aware of the vibrations coming from California in the 60s. And I was totally aware of the Vietnam conflict and what was happening to young men in such huge numbers, and aware of the counterculture. And parenthetically, I believe that today we are the new counterculture. I think I feel that very strongly. And it's really just so many things have conspired against everybody in the period since the Grateful Dead and Woodstock, which were sort of big parts of my early socialization when I was, becoming a new person in the world. That's what I looked up to, totally, because I was critical of in myself of society and what was generally expected of everybody, and those horrible social set roles that early feminists, I thought, great, if we're going to get rid of being masculine men and feminine women just because we haven't got any other choices, great, fantastic. One thing you said about, I'm very crap at this, so please bear with me. One thing you said about equality, you use the word in its singular. I think that's a really crucial point. You use the word equality. That's one thing. But today, in today's politically correct language, you're not allowed to say that. It's got to be equalities, because it has to be equality in racial terms and in gender terms and in every possible way you can look at it. And to me, that's logically incoherent. Anyway, I apologize for busting in like this.
Don't, that's fine. Equality is the most appropriate term, because what they're trying to do is channel your thinking into these certain areas, equalities, and that dilutes the real meaning of equality. Equality based on equal justice.
Sure.
And gosh, what you were referring to about the 70s, and I can relate so well to how, I luckily I didn't go, but I almost had to go to Vietnam myself, and I know many who did, of course. And it was horror, where during these times men were dying like flies in Vietnam, and during that time is when I don't even like to women livers, equality advocates were coming to bat for men, because they were being killed and disregarded as cannon fodder without much concern at the beginning in Vietnam. And a lot of women during that time were getting awareness, of men, how men were treated in society. And the Vietnam thing really highlighted this. You couldn't have a total equality effort without considering men, especially with Vietnam going on. And I encountered quite a few women that were very much men's rights, men's equality advocates during those periods of time. And it was looking pretty good. But then feminism came into the scene, and feminists commandeered anything that could be even closely related to the equality efforts that were beginning to form during those times. And I'm not sure if you recall, but some of the even some of the books, like through like Esther Villaire, she was one from those times. Who, are you familiar with her?
No, I just heard about her today.
Oh, okay. And
well, I want to stop you guys there, and this is a very interesting conversation. But Sean, we brought you in because you said that sugar causes materialism, and we were hoping that you could clarify that, because while Alan here answered the philosophy of that, you seem to be more focused on like what actually happens in the brain. So I was hoping you could give us some clarification on that.
I'm only repeating stuff that I've heard through investigating giving up sugar in my own diet, which I found to be the most difficult drug I've ever had to relinquish, having got rid of alcohol and tobacco previously. And as part of that, I was educated on YouTube by Dr. Robert Lustig. And also there are various other accounts of the endocrinology of the digestion of sugars and carbohydrates and how these create unhelpful cycles of insulin in the body, which creates ill health multiple ill health in forms of manifestations of what we now call metabolic syndrome. And there are specific neuroreceptors in the brain which are triggered in cascade form by taking dietary sugar, especially pure refined sugar. It goes in and it just makes your brain light up like a Christmas tree. And then very, very quickly you get a withdrawal, you get a down and a withdrawal afterwards. And because it becomes very habit forming, you're constantly putting more sugar in to get the same high that you got the first time. And this creates very damaging cycles in the metabolism more generally, from what I understand. But I am no biochemist, I'm no endocrinologist. I've just heard this from people who are.
I'd like to add to that real quick, because I think there is a pertinent thing here, that back in the 60s, 70s, they were doing studies like how fat was bad for you. Exactly. And this was actually done by the Sugar Council. They wanted to put this idea that fat was bad so we could have non-fat stuff. Well, how did they improve the taste of non-fat? By putting lots of sugar into it. And it's only now we're starting to come, hey, sugar's the bad thing. Fats are not that bad for you, but we've already made people addicts.
Exactly so. And as part of the brain chemistry of it, it becomes a very grasping brain habit. And this is the connection with materialism. Because you're habituated for always wanting more of something, you then get in the brain habit of always wanting more of everything, if that makes sense.
Sure. I'm not a expert on this, but I am familiar with it and have studied it to some extent. I know what you're talking about. It's like the person who goes to work in the morning, grabs a cup of coffee, high caffeine, high sugar, and then through mid-morning or so, they experience a low at work. And are you're familiar? You can relate to what I'm saying?
Sure.
And if you have a carb, a complex carb, then you're better off, because then your body can handle it better, and it's much better for you. Although I don't advocate eating a lot of carbs either. Like a bowl of mush, oatmeal is better for you than something with just a lot of sugar in it, and it'll get you through the day. Like oatmeal, maybe a boiled egg, some yogurt. But I understand what you're saying. And that does enter into the equation as far as what we can think and how we think and how our brains work.
Right.
I'd like to add another dimension to this, which I think kind of relates to men's issues, is, when we have, like, more and more now, there are single mothers than there are two-parent homes.
Sure.
And I remember when I was living with my last girlfriend, she was kind of going through a divorce, and she had split custody with her husband of her children. And every time she had her children, she'd take them to McDonald's. That she was basically using sugar, which basically is what McDonald's is. I eat at McDonald's, I'm guilty, but she was bribing them with sugar. And a lot of parents, instead of trying to build a dynamic with their children, give them sugar to win their loyalties. But what kind of lasting effects is this going to have on children that they're basically becoming addicts and cannot become fully functional people.
Good point. Yes.
Well, if you create a society of addicts, it becomes easy to push new habits on them. Having learned how to be addicted to something, I believe that Pete Townsend or one of those rock and roll guys said, no, it was Eric Clapton, who was famous for using heroin and other heavy drugs, was asked, where did your drug habit begin? He told the interviewer, from sugar, from the age of 3, 4, 5, when I would just binge on sugar. And that's when my addictive habit was established. And what I'm trying to say is that there's a profit incentive in creating an addicted population, because once they're habituated to being habituated, you can get them a bit habituated to anything, and that includes like a social media thing. Like, the social media was not existent when we were kids, but now it's become, seems to me to be, one of the biggest addictions that people have. I should shut up.
No. I understand what you're saying as far as the addictions go, because it's like, the problem is, it's like a popular, fashionable process where the social interaction, just like the sugar is a fast fix, the social interaction is absent as well. So social media in some cases, which kind of does connect with TikTok, when I mentioned earlier, it's sufficing just as sugar. Is that kind of where you're going with that as well?
Exactly. And I think we can link this back to hysteria. I was reading or watching something earlier in the week about reports of hysteria among nuns in the 15th century, outbreaks of mutual biting among these isolated women who had no men in their lives and living, long before we did, who would, for some reason, suddenly start to bite each other and had to be separated in order to break down the contagion of this hysteria in these small social circles. And I think today, part of what we're seeing is the spread of hysteria unchecked through social media. I think we could look at Me Too as that. As suddenly there's this new bogeyman. Suddenly there's this new fictional thing to be frightened of, and everybody's transmitting this fear to everybody else. Sorry.
I'm going to go ahead and stop you there. We're going to come to a close, although I do want to say that the nuns biting each other in the 15th century might be the first case of rug munchers. But I thank you, Alan Millard and Sean G. You asked some really great questions this time, and I'm happy to bring you on. And I thought that this went very well, so I thank everyone else who also asked questions. Just real quick, Alan, how can people find your stuff?
Yes, and that's what I was going to encourage Sean to do, is check Men's Equality on Facebook. And I'm also on YouTube, Men's Equality, and then Alan Millard, and on Twitter. But there's quite a group on Men's Equality on Facebook. I also had some other groups too. But get in touch with me through there, Sean, and I've really appreciated our conversation and meeting you today.
Exactly. One thing I'd like to add is that Whova is a great place to connect with each other. So this platform itself is a great way to connect immediately if you'd like to. So
cool.
Thank you. I certainly will check you out on YouTube. I'll be doing that straight away.
Right. Thanks. Take care.
You
And
too.
we have Steve Sabota coming up. He's going to give a presentation and then a live Q&A with Vernon Meeks. And then after that, we have Greg Ellis. So I will see you when we're doing the live Q&A with Greg Ellis. Everyone take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.